Right, do the intro. Hi there, YouTube. Mark Vergeer here. It's a Sunday afternoon. It's 15:36. I'm streaming. It's the second part of the Can You Replace Your Entire Gaming Collection or Game Room with an Emulation PC. And I've been showing you a couple of systems. In this stream I want to focus on the Sony systems that are capable of being emulated. The PlayStation, PlayStation 2, PSP. There is a PS3 emulator in the works, but I haven't tried that, and yeah, it's something that I do not see myself emulating at any time soon, because yeah, the PlayStation 3 pretty much is still a current system. But let's see if I can change over to the emulation here. So yeah, the chat is in operation. I don't think anyone is watching yet. Let me see if I can pop out the chat. No, I don't think. Let me see if the stream is online. Yeah, I'm live. No one is watching yet. Yeah, I turned it on I turned it on. What is it? I'll let people know on Twitch, Twitter that I'm streaming. I'm not streaming on Twitch. So yeah, second part of the stream. Let's pop the chat out. Okay. Oh. Let's do it like that. I'm drinking tea, and let's see if I can show you some original PlayStation. Now, the original PlayStation, great system. I bought it, I guess when it was 2 years on the market or something. The must-have system for me was Gran Turismo and Ridge Racer Type 4. These games really became the go-to games for me. Now, I've got a ton of these old grey boxes, but what also happens is that these tend to overheat and they can break down. But I have got a ton of them, and I still play them quite a bit. You can play the PlayStation 1 on your PlayStation 2 console, so that's also a good one. You can also play it on the PlayStation 3. Now I'm using the ePSXe emulator, and I wanted to show you one of the first games that I played on my PlayStation, which was Gran Turismo, the original Gran Turismo. There's a ton of games, of course, on here. A lot of them I ripped myself, and imaging PlayStation discs is actually quite a specific art, because a lot of the copy protection consists of faulty sectors being on the discs, so you really want to image your discs, including the faulty sectors. Let's play the European version and turn on the analog controller. Now I have the sound of these emulators pretty low, as to not get any issues with copyright and stuff. Hello, Mark Blaster. Yeah, I'm just, you know, checking out some original PlayStation 2 and PSP to see whether or not these emulators can actually replace the original hardware. I'm using an emulator and a plugin that actually enhances the graphics of the original PlayStation quite a bit, but it doesn't increase the resolution. It does do 32-bit, as you can see in the little video. That would be a lot more dittered on the original system, and also there's some corrections going on in the polygons being rendered, because the PlayStation really was a system that had a lot of jittering when it came to mapping the textures on the polygons. Now, this game, Gran Turismo, I usually play it with the in-car view, but I guess for the purposes of this video I played with the exterior view, because I find that this actually makes for a lot nicer watching if you are watching a person race. Then this perspective is actually the nicest. But as you are trailing behind the car in this perspective, actually steering is quite a bit more difficult. But just the way the cars are suspended, and it's not perfect yet, but I mean, when I first saw this, I was used to Screamer on the PC or Need for Speed, and this was just, I mean, it was fast, it had some physics, some proper physics, and it was just, you know, you popped in the disc and you were off playing. And that is something that, I mean, I had been tinkering with PCs for a long time, and I just didn't feel like continuing to tinker, because, you know, with the 3DFX cards and the Voodoo cards and the stealth cards and all the processors being bumped up all the time, I just figured, you know, let's jump into console gaming, because you know, you just bought a disc, and each of us we had the same experience regardless. So yeah, this is a wonderful game. It's I was gamer. Yeah, it's a wonderful game. Actually, I suck at it a bit now, because I'm not used to playing it like this. I usually play it like this, but is a bit nauseating for. So yeah, this is yeah, just, you know, one of the best games, I guess, on the system. And if you look at the hey, guess that's Steve. Hey, Steve. Well, I'm doing an impromptu stream. I'm just checking whether or not I can replace my Sony consoles with emulation. I guess not. But, you know, I just want to demonstrate how good playing these games on a PC can actually be. You can enhance the graphics, you can enhance the resolution here. You know, you can have it render at 1080p. I don't think it does the games justice. Now it is rendering at what is it? It is rendering at 1080p actually, but it uses the same internal resolution as the original PlayStation. It does enhance rendering the polygons and mapping the textures, so you do get a lot less warping. But yeah, I mean, and less dithering, of course. But I mean, I saw this, you know, this replay thing going on in the game store, and I thought, yeah, these systems. I saw this running on the PlayStation, and I thought, yeah, this is something I really want. I really want to play. So Gran Turismo, that really was, yeah, the go-to system. Now, I want to show you something else. Gran Turismo, the arcade mode. Let's see if, yeah, it does it again. The plugin I'm using, the graphics plugin I'm using, is a bit experimental and temperamental, so sometimes it hangs. I imported the Gran Turismo 2 discs. I actually pre-ordered those the moment I noticed it was coming out. It came out in NTSC territories a couple of months ahead of PAL territories. And here I'm playing the 1.1 version because, yeah, Gran Turismo, the NTSC version, really needed an update. The first edition game is actually faulty because there's a lot of bugs in there. But as you can't software update PlayStation 1 games, they actually released a 1.1 version that took care of a lot of the bugs. Of course, people who bought the 1.0, 1.0 version like I did, well, you know, they had, it's like tough luck. I agree, Steve. Nothing replaces the good old consoles. I mean, I'm playing this with a Logitech Rumblepad 2, which really is very much like playing it on a PlayStation 2 controller. It really has the same layout. But nothing beats playing it on the real system. So, yeah. But these systems will fail eventually. So, and it's ease of use. I mean, I've imaged all my discs, all my PlayStation 1 and all my PlayStation 2 discs on the NAS, and I'm actually playing this off the network. So, yeah, but let's check out the Rally version. And I'm quite partial to the Subaru Impreza. And there's just one rally track. Now, if there's one genre that the original PlayStation actually is quite good at, then it's the racing games. There's a ton of racing games. But when I first saw this on the PlayStation, PlayStation 2, the PlayStation, I was just blown away. Gran Turismo 2. And again, I usually play this with the in-car view. And I'll just do a single lap and show you some of the replay. And then I'll show you the other one, Gran Turismo 3, because of course the series continued on the newer console. And I guess on the PlayStation you had Gran Turismo 3 and 4, I believe, and there were also some sort of prequels to that. And I'm quite partial to Gran Turismo 3, which is actually an excellent racing game. It looks stellar even to this day, but this doesn't look bad either. Oops. Yeah, and always oversteer in this, and I'm too fast in this corner. Of course, the older consoles, they do suffer pop-up. That's something that they tend to want to mask using fog, or just have it pop up. These consoles only had, I mean, all these systems, they had a limited amount of polygons and a limited amount of texture memory. So yeah, you just couldn't fill the entire screen up to infinity with all these polygons and textures. So they had to make compromises. So I'll do the replay now. And yeah, just check out how this looks. And of course, the original PlayStation showed this all a bit more dittered, because the system actually rendered in 16-bit video, and it achieved more colors by doing dithering. Actually, that is something that all the PlayStations tended to do. I guess the PlayStation 3 actually to some extent still dithers. PlayStation 4 doesn't. But of course, it takes a lot less processing power to render something at 16-bit than it does at 32-bit. But yeah, actually the only screen processing I do here is actually rendering the image at 32-bit, so it is less pixelated. But I mean, on a CRT, on a Sony CRT, a small Sony CRT, 14-inch Sony CRT. That's actually the most perfect screen for the original PlayStation. But yeah, look at this. I mean, this just looks awesome. The way the cars move, the shadow underneath the car, the dust that is kicked off from behind the car, is just awesome. And the music, they had a lot of rock music going on in the background. It really was, you know, a system that, a game that really said, you know, gaming isn't just for kids. It's for adults as well, young adults. And I just lap this up. I just love this. Okay, the convenience of emulation is just by pressing Escape, you're into the PC mode. PlayStation 2 with a click of a button, you're in the PlayStation 2. And let's check out Gran Turismo 3 on the PlayStation 2. Let me see, Gran Turismo 3, and you have A-Spec, and you have Gran Turismo, the regular one, Gran Turismo 4, and Prologue, Gran Turismo Concept 2002, Tokyo, Geneva. I'm quite partial to this one. So let's double click. And here we have the PlayStation 2. Gran Turismo 3 on the PlayStation 2. And let's select English. And actually, beyond PlayStation, beyond Gran Turismo 3, I did buy the others, but for some reason I just am quite partial to Gran Turismo 3. Anything beyond, they sort of lost me there. Not sure why, but yeah, that's just how it is. Single race. Hold on. Let's go back. I need to change the options. Let me see. Is there options? No. Let's go back. Because I want to set it to 16:9 aspect ratio. Something that wasn't default with a lot of games, a lot of systems. 16:9. And then arcade mode. Yeah, this game, WizGamer, this game actually was the game that I just wanted to have. I bought a PlayStation 2 for. Let's do the Swiss Alps, because that's also a rally game, and we can compare the graphics, you know, the bump up from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3. And yeah, I mean, look at this. A lot more polygons were used. Environmental mapping was used. And actually, this is running in software mode. You can, within this emulator, you can actually, it's the ePSXe emulator. You can opt to render using the graphics card hardware or the software mode. The software mode is more compatible. It gives you less graphical aberrations, but it's slower. And well, full speed if your system is fast enough. This is just an awesome game. And this really does run full speed on my fourth generation Core i5. It has 4 threads, 4 cores. It's running at 3.5 gigahertz, and I'm using an Nvidia GTX 950, not the fastest card. And let's see if I can. This is actually a bit nicer for a lot of people. You get less nauseous. And I found out that the exterior car view when watching someone race is nicer than the in-car view. There's the brake hard. But look at the grass. That's something that that really caught my eye when I first did the rally course. That there was grass, strands of grass sticking out of the ground, and it was just all so very fast and fluid. And I sort of expected this to be, you know, like laggy but it isn't. It's very fluent and very fast, and the amount of detail. Now, using software mode in this game. Software rendering, you can actually see that the dirt actually kicks out from underneath the car. And what you can do is actually you can switch over to hardware rendering by pressing Control N, and you can actually see that here's the menu. And let's go to video, plugin settings. It says software mode, and I'll go to hardware mode, and it does OpenGL. Press OK, and it just switched, and I press start or alt. So now it's using DirectX 11 hardware mode. It's a bit faster, but now you can actually see an aberration. You can actually see that the dirt that is kicked off from underneath the front wheels, there's a how do you say that? There's a sequence issue where it actually shows through the car, which is not meant to be. So, and it's actually just as fast. So what I usually do is I use software mode by default. DirectX 11 software mode with 2 threads from the CPU core for rendering the software mode, and that just basically has the dirt kicking up from underneath the car properly. Well, this is quite an optimized title, or maybe not so demanding of the PlayStation 3, but there's PlayStation 2, but there are titles that are very demanding. And they may sometimes run a tad slower, and sometimes you really have to use the hardware rendering, because otherwise it's too slow. But my system is fast enough just to have full speed PlayStation emulation, PlayStation 2 emulation. Yeah, it's it runs it surprisingly well. I'm using the latest betas always of this emulator. There's nightly builds and stuff, and I'm using just the most recent emulator here. I also have a stable release build that I can opt to select if games are broken and stuff. Yeah, and now I wanted to show you some of the replay. I believe I can. And first, look at that. That's just. Now, of course, this is a real bump up in graphics. I mean, if you look at the if you look at the 16-bit level of graphics and then the 32-bit consoles like the PlayStation 1, that was a huge jump. And from the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2, it was a huge jump. But then the other jumps from PlayStation 2 to 3, I mean, yeah, the systems became HD. So, you know, the original Xbox also, it wasn't really HD. A lot of people were using. Well, it could do HD. I mean, the PlayStation 2 could actually do HD as well. But it wasn't, I mean, the jumps up weren't that big, you know. I mean, and I think, I still think that this actually looks quite good. And now there's actually a speed issue. It was going a bit slower. This is not a movie. This is just the engine rendering it. And yeah, sometimes the speed just becomes a tad slower. That doesn't happen in the what is it, in the hardware mode. Let me see. Another PlayStation game that actually a late PlayStation game that actually is amazing. Is actually let me see, is actually Expendable. Yeah, this one. This game came out on the, now I'm hoping that it'll run. I'm not sure what happened, but oh gosh, I do think that the plugin is wreaking havoc again. Let me see if it is actually running. ePSXe. No, it's not running, so it's not being started. I really wonder why. Ah, okay, so it does boot. play. This is really interesting. Well, this is why emulation can't replace your original hardware. Yeah. So this is the plugin causing issues. This is the I'm using an older version of the plugin. Basically, it wants you to select. Let's take off the. Let me see if it'll work. Basically, it tries to detect the gamepad, and it allows you to change it to analog. And now it just doesn't want to work. There's this big square where normally the option to select the analog mode is present, but yeah, it doesn't want to work. Hi, Paul. Let's see if I can change this to use the RetroArch emulator and run that. Like so. Oh, it is again. Yeah. I guess me trying to run it, sort of. I mean, yeah. I've had this Spectre update on my system, and it's not fun. RetroArch doesn't respond. So, you know what? I think I need to. It might be that the beta of the PlayStation 2 emulator isn't playing nice. So I'm rebooting my system. Hi, Michelle. Yeah, no, it's a known issue. PlayStation 2 emulator, it's a nightly build, and it probably doesn't play very nicely releasing the hardware resources back to Windows. The PlayStation emulator, also I'm using a beta of a graphics driver. It might also not play very nice. So let me see, webcam. Yeah, I'm just going to let me see, type in my password like so. Hope you guys didn't see that. Launchbox. Oh, and if you see some interference in the little window, that's because of the webcam and the screen refresh rates not syncing up properly. Let me see if Launchbox will actually load in. Yes, there's just a ton of games being loaded in. Oh, let me see if I can have the chat being, yeah. So a game that I wanted to show off and hopefully will be able to show off is actually Expendable. Expendable, that's Millennium Soldiers. That actually is one of the hidden gems on the PlayStation. If you check out how it looks, it's just amazing. It uses a lot of lighting and a lot of graphical fancy stuff that actually a lot of the earlier PlayStation titles just weren't able to pull off. And this was released pretty late in the PlayStation's life. Now I hope this will work. It still will not work. Oh, it will. Yep, it's running. It's running on the RetroArch emulator. Hopefully it'll. Hopefully it'll run. Expendable. Let's see if I can change it to options. No, yeah, resolution, dithering pattern, one native, dual shock, analog toggle button. No, I'm not sure. Let's continue. Resume. Let's see. This game actually it uses slow disk image access or whatever. It uses tank controls, and this game actually should have been a dual analog shooter. Now this came out when dual analog was available, but it doesn't use it to the full extent. The only version of this game that runs well with dual analog sticks is the Android port, but that only will run on versions of Android below 5 and above 4. So yeah, I just want to show you how the graphics look. It's one of the best looking PlayStation original titles, and it's not using the analog stick. It uses the thumb pad, and basically you just turn around and you walk, which just doesn't make for nice gaming. So I'd like to see if I can change it around again. Press escape and say edit and do emulation and change it back to ePSXe. I have to wait a bit. Yeah, and then click. Yeah. So as you can see, it's that switch to analog thing that actually craps up the emulator. And if it works, it works. But you really have to reboot your system, because if it just keeps on hanging, you just have to reboot your system. But now I'm using the analog mode. And if you compare this screen with the previous screen, this previous screen was actually using the original PlayStation dithering, and this is actually using the 32-bit rendering, which uses a lot less dithering, but it produces stellar effects actually in this game. But this is a very nice looking game. I may actually have to show you the Dreamcast version right after this, just to compare how well it actually looks. And this game, if you want to play it, it's also out on Good Old Games. You can actually play the Windows port that also has tank controls, sadly. But if you are using the analog mode, basically it's just a run and gun, very similar to Commando. And you can use the analog, the other analog stick to strafe. But then you have the issue: how do you shoot? You can shoot with the trigger, and then you can strafe. Oh man, it's just a convoluted control scheme, and the sad part is that I have yet to find a manner to map the controls. Perhaps actually it is possible. Let's press start. No. So it's not possible to change the control scheme to like a dual analog control scheme, because, you know, firing and moving around independently would actually work best. But as you can see, there's transparent explosions. Oh, there's, whoa, bloody hell. There's transparent explosions. There's glow. There's bloom. There's a ton of stuff going on. There's even effects of the bullets once they traverse over the ground. You can actually see lighting effects being casted off the bullets. So yeah, quite an amazing looking PlayStation 1 game. It's just hard to believe that it actually is running on a PlayStation 1. Knowing the limitations of the hardware, they're actually doing a lot of this trickery in software. Whoa! And I managed to get squeezed underneath. But just know how a lot of these PlayStation games looked, and how this looks is just amazing. And this is just one of my favorite games, and It's a bit of a hidden gem, I think. This is a secret. Now there is something weird with this analog stick, because you can walk diagonally quite easily, but you can't if you turn your, if you go straight up and straight down, or straight to the left or the right, it just doesn't want to move. It's really weird. Oh, and you jump a bomb, but yeah, amazing stuff, isn't it? I mean, it just looks awesome. Oh, Apocalypse. That's cool. That's cool to know. Let's, well, you know, let's what? You know what? Let's check it out. Perhaps I do have it. Apocalypse. Apocalypse. PR. Yeah, you really have to know your alphabet. PQR. Apocalypse. Why not? Let's see. Let's see if it works with analog. Let's see if it's such an excellent game. It's a Bruce Willis game. Bye, Michelle. Thanks for watching. I'll show you the expandable game on the Dreamcast in a while, but let's see how Apocalypse actually works. If it will work. I do own this actually, but it's been a long time. Oh yeah, yeah. If you look at this graphics, the whole fire thing, yeah, that's enhanced PlayStation graphics. Also the textures, there's lighting effects on the textures. So yeah, this is also one of these Garo shading titles, really pushing the PlayStation hardware to the max.
Here we go.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I've played this before. This also is quite a cool title. You also have a game called Assault. Whoa, Prisoner. Yeah, you really. This actually does use the analog sticks properly, which is cool. And it's very fast. And there's transparency effects and stuff. Yeah, really cool looking game. Let's see if I can show you expandable on the Dreamcast. I mean, this is actually focusing on this is actually focusing on the Sony consoles, but expandable Millennium Soldier, here it is. Millennium Soldier, and then I'll do this one. This is using a core, a RetroArch emulator, and basically it's full speed. It runs at 60 frames per second. You won't be able to tell in the screen grab or in this stream, because this is actually streaming at 30 frames per second, because my Avermedia Live Gamer Portable only grabs at 16 at 30 frames per second. But yeah, just there are, of course, it isn't perfect. I mean, this will not replace your Sega Dreamcast, you know, completely. It's just ease of use. But it does play this game at 640 by 480. And I mean, a lot of the screens are identical, and actually the levels are identical. And if you see this, let's turn down the volume just a tad. This actually runs at 640 by 480. Press start to join. And it also does the run and gun. But it does the analog controls better, because it doesn't stall when you move directly to the left or the right. It does so on the PlayStation version. Now this actually uses less fancy lighting effects than the PlayStation game. There's no light. Oh, there is some light, but the Dreamcast hardware, good as it was, doesn't have a lot of fancy lighting effects, like for example the PlayStation 2 has. They really had to do this all in software. So yeah, one of the big advantages of the Dreamcast was the resolution and the fact that you could program it in DirectX. But actually, knowing the abilities of the hardware, actually the PlayStation 1 version is much more of a technical achievement than this game running on the Dreamcast, although it is quite a stellar game. But as you can see, it's actually the same layout. Oh, and I died. But yeah, it's a cool game. It's a cool system. Let's see if I can move back to the Sony PlayStation. It doesn't like to switch around a lot. That's this system of mine. But another great looking game on the PlayStation is Ridge Racer Type 4, but let's check out Rage Racer, for example. Let me see, because that actually shows you what most of the titles actually used. Of course, this is the PlayStation is a very cool sprite 2D pixel pusher. Oh wait, yeah, I think Nitrous Oxide. I have that as well. I believe this also uses quite fancy. Hey Atari Leaf, it's nice of you to swing by. Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm just doing an ad hoc stream. I'm checking whether or not I can replace my PlayStation consoles with emulation. I don't think I can fully replace the consoles, but I'm actually quite surprised by the level of emulation that is achieved. Oh well, let's get rid of that little rotating ring. I think this one also is quite a late release, and it's sort of a racing shoot 'em up game, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I'll show you Ridge Racer Type 4 because that's also one of the games that I wanted to compare. But this also is quite a late game. It's almost like it's Tempest like, it's F-Zero like, it's yeah, and I'm already playing it. There's a lot of well, I mean, it's yeah. This is. I mean, it looks great, but this also happens on the original PlayStation. I mean, it's not as smooth. They use so much lighting effects that actually the frame rate is just not keeping up with the gameplay. So yeah, you know, a stellar looking game. But it's just virtually unplayable because it's just not working properly. But let me see. Rage Racer. So yeah, Jeremy, it's not really. Hey Chris, nice of you to stop by. Rage Racer. That's let me see if I can find that. PQR. Of course, I can type it in. Rage Racer. Is that no? It might not be. It might actually not be in my bloody hell. It might actually not be in my list, which will be strange. Because it's one of my favorite games. Roll Cage. Roll Cage also uses very fancy graphics. These two games, Roll Cage 1 and 2, are nice racing games. Ridge Racer, Turbo Mode, Ridge Racer Evolution. Well, Ridge Racer, for example, one of the release games for the PlayStation. Just look at how the graphics are. I mean, it's a stellar game, great graphics, but there's not any lighting effects or environmental mapping, or you know. Oh yeah, this is something that Namco really was very famous for, doing the little game whilst loading. Actually, they patented it at some point. As you can see, the textures and I mean, it's all very flat. Of course, this is running at 60 frames per second. It's a great game, and it's one of the release games, and it's amazing how fast this actually will run. This is actually the American version. And it's just very fast. Well, also quite an achievement on the old PlayStation. Whoa, bloody hell. But let's check out Ridge Racer Type 4, because this was of course a release game, and Ridge Racer Type 4, and I believe we just chanced upon it. Let me see, or wasn't it about here somewhere? Type 4. Let's see if I can type Ridge Racer Type 4. Yep. So this was actually released, and you do want to play with the analog stick. This actually was released. Oh, thank you, WizGamer. Thanks for stopping by. I think emulated CD is a good idea. Main reason I would think you would the CD-based menu may not last as long as cartridges. Yeah, a lot. I've had a lot of lasers fail on me on Saturns and PlayStations and PlayStation 2. So going solid state on these systems is actually the way to go. On the Dreamcast, it is actually possible to have a load stuff of SD cards. On the PlayStation 2, you can actually with free boot, you can actually boot games off SD cards, USB sticks, and of the network, so that helps. But this game actually is quite amazing as well, because this actually uses a lot of the fancy graphics that you've seen in the other games that I was using. It uses a technique called Gouraud shading. Hey Chris, what is it? Wiz is leaving us. And let's quickly move through these menus. Yeah, I always wonder why there are so many hierarchical menus to navigate whenever you wanna go race, because it's just this also you really have to press and just you know you just I just want to race, I just want to go into the race, and there's this ton of this stuff and this crap that you have to navigate through, because yeah, well, there's a very nice backstory of course. But this, just look at how it looks compared to the other Ridge Racer. There's a bit of environmental mapping going on in now this, if people are used to the if people are used to playing the PAL version, this is the NTSC version, and this actually plays quite a bit faster than the PAL version. So if you think this is running too fast, well, it's not really, but the NTSC version is about 20% faster. So we in PAL territories really got screwed. That changed actually with the consoles, the Dreamcast and the original Xbox and the PlayStation 2, because they allowed us to select the screen mode to work at 60 Hertz. So basically making the games run as quickly as they would on the NTSC counterparts. But up to that point, we basically usually had games running much slower. Commodore 64 is a good example of games running a lot slower. A PAL ColecoVision is actually a whole lot slower. Some consoles do it better. There are consoles where the games are actually properly ported with them running as fast on both machines, but a system that really has it very bad when it comes to PAL is the TurboGrafx. The TurboGrafx 16. I mean, it was released. It wasn't released. It was produced. It was developed, but it sort of never got released in PAL territories. But if you run TurboGrafx 16 games, PAL games, they really are very, very slow. What time is it on your neck of the woods, Mark? 10:24 here in southern Ontario. I'm 6 hours ahead of you. Atari, Leaf, Jeremy, I'm 6 hours ahead. The rest of North America often is 7, but yeah, Ontario is like 6 hours time difference. But yeah, a lot of very nice lighting effects. As you can see, you know, it's just a stellar looking game that's actually almost beyond what you can find on the rest of the PlayStation titles. But yeah, very much different from the first Ridge Racer. You know, the graphics look much nicer. They did cheat a bit, of course, because a lot of the lighting effects that you see is actually something that is in the textures as well. So, but yeah, I mean, an NTSC PlayStation original compared to a PAL unit really is quite different. So if you really want to play the games at their intended speeds, go for an NTSC. A lot of the games were developed in NTSC countries natively, but yeah, this is quite cool. Now, I've been streaming for about 51 minutes, and what I wanted to do is go to the last of the Sony PlayStation consoles that I fancied demoing, and of course I need to get rid of this search. Well, let's check out Ridge Racer 2 on the PlayStation Portable. Let me see, Ridge Racer. Oh wait, another great title that does run with some issues is actually Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast. If I use the Wii Homebrew channel, it is possible to use the real PS1 discs on the Wii, or does it take ROMs only? I've soft modded my Wii, and it actually uses a similar emulator than the PC version, but you have to run ISOs off the memory. It doesn't use the PC, it doesn't use the Wii's drive, I believe, which is a shame because otherwise it would have been amazing. But the PC emulator actually is capable of using the real discs. Both the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2 is actually continue without saving, is actually capable of using the original media, as well as the Saturn is also capable of using the original media. Now, I'm not from the US, so I'm choosing my Dutch flag, and I'm a Taurus, and the rest may remain the same. Now, you have to remember, this is actually a PSP, a Sony PSP that this is running on. And I have to go for the Dino. That's my favorite system. This actually runs a lot better on. This actually runs a lot better on the emulator than it does run on the real hardware. Yeah, it's. I would love to be able to use my real optical discs on a new system. Actually, I do. I have a Linux box that has Sony emulator set up on it, and I can pop in the original discs, and it just boots the emulator, and it just runs the discs just like a console would. Now, sometimes you will see diagonal flashes on the screen, and that's because certain polygons are mapped wrongly. So I mean, so there's actually a line or a surface drawn where there shouldn't be. And for some reason in this game this happens quite a bit diagonally. And on the real PSP hardware, actually this often drops down to 15 frames per second, which makes it not as playable as you would like. But I mean, it's really weird. But on the small screen, it just doesn't bother me that much. Oops. Yeah, the brake button on the PlayStation version is actually a bit different than it is on the whoops. Oh, it's actually the square, or the what is it, the triangle button, which is actually quite weird. Really mapped a bit weird. But yeah, I mean, for a PlayStation Portable game, this looks nice, and on a smaller screen, it jumping down to 15 frames per second, you know, you don't notice it that much. A smaller screen is much more forgiving when frames are dropped, but for some reason, if you are looking at this on a big screen, frame drops are much easier noticed. Now, there's not too many rendering issues with this game. And of course, this is all about drifting through the environment. But yeah, I mean, this really looks very nice. And yeah, I think the PlayStation Portables, it really is somewhere in between the PlayStation Original and the PlayStation 2. It's a very capable machine. A lot of people actually use these machines to emulate a lot of older hardware. People have been using emulators on the PSP for as long as I can remember, often playing more emulators than real games. But a lot of the games really translate well. And I prefer to run this at the original resolution, as you can see. This emulator actually is capable of running it at a higher resolution, and there's a lot of nice reflections going on here. And these diagonal lines that sometimes pop up are just very disorienting sometimes. But yeah, you can bump up the resolution to run at, you know, 1080p or even higher, and the textures used in these games are actually they work quite well on high resolution. So perhaps the design of this system was actually that it would upscale pretty nicely. But I mean, that's the purist in me. If I'm yeah, and I'm just not gonna make it, am I? Whoa. I just want to use the original resolution. I mean, of course I'm upscaling it, but I just prefer to use the original resolution on these consoles, because that works best with the textures often. Although this does upscale rather nicely to much higher resolutions, but yeah, I just want to have an experience on the screen that is very close to the original. Now here you can actually see some issues with the water. The surface of the water is actually missing. The surface is actually bright white. The reflections are rendered, but yeah, so there are some issues in certain games, and yeah, basically someone has to point those out to the programmers, and they can see what functions, what graphic functions they haven't implemented yet. But a lot of the games actually run perfectly. Jeremy, okay, thanks Mark, I guess that's fine, but yeah, it would be nice to use original discs. Yeah, you can image them using imaging software, and just just have them imaged on your hard drive or your flash drive or whatever. let me see. Oh yeah, Ridge Racer type. Ridge Racer. Ridge Racer. This Ridge Racer 2 on the PSP is actually very similar to Ridge Racer 7 on the Ridge Racer 7 on the PlayStation 3. Press select. Paul, someone has ported Quake to the Sony Vita now, and it's now nearly complete, and it's in beta. Oh, cool. Yeah, the Vita. I have a Vita. I do have a lot of downloaded games that I had on the PlayStation Portable. Yeah, you have to hack it, and I'm usually on firmware that doesn't allow that. But yeah, being able to use homebrew on the Vita, I mean, the Vita basically is dead, right? I don't think a lot of third-party people or first-party people are actually still developing for it. So breaking that open and using homebrew on it might be the way to go. I think the Vita is would be very compatible with let me see, this one. The Vita would be very compatible playing PSP games, I guess. It does so with the downloaded store games. Now this does environmental mapping. This actually looks also very similar to Ridge Racer 5, which also was a release, I think a release game on the PlayStation 2. Also a must-have title if you are keen on Ridge Racer. Now there are some graphical aberrations in this version of the emulator as well. Not always, but you will see that when you approach some of the cars. There's a reflection, an environmental reflection mapping thing that sometimes works up, and then the cars appear bright white or with a white shimmer across it like that. That's the environmental mapping function not working correctly. It doesn't always kick in. In that car it just worked. Now this emulator, I'm using a recent version. On the older version it didn't kick in like that, but on the newer version of this emulator it does. So it's a bit of a regression, and that's something that you will have to deal with when using emulators and when using emulators on PC. All sorts of unexpected effects, and some of them are game breakers, some of them are not. Let me see. What? Trying to see whether or not I can change the view. I don't think I can. But yeah, this is a very familiar track that a lot of people playing Ridge Racer, the original. Look, now the cars don't have this issue, and now they have. So this doesn't happen in the previous version of the emulator, but it does happen sometimes in this version. So sometimes it pays to just keep different versions of the emulator around. So if something gets broken, you still get to go back to the previous version. And I can play these games I can play in RetroArch, but also I can play them in RetroArch, but also in PPSPP. So if something doesn't work in RetroArch or vice versa, I can use it in PPSPP. And this just is a very nice racing game. Let's do some boost. So yeah, I mean, this just really works well. Now, what also is quite good, if you, this is God of War. Basically, if God of War runs full speed on your emulated PlayStation Portable with the PPSP emulator or RetroArch, then most other games will run nice as well. Because it's a very taxing game, let's do the easy version. It really just looks almost as good as the PlayStation 2 version. Now, the downside of this game is that as long as you haven't saved the game, then you have to sit through the introduction video. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of Sony games that you can easily play on an emulator, but I mean, it does function best on the real hardware. But the thing is, you really get spoiled, because if you run PlayStation games upscale, PlayStation 2 games and PlayStation 1 games upscaled on the emulators through the PC with you know, nice high definition RGB plus mode of display. I mean, the PlayStation, it does RGB, but also composite, and the original PlayStation as well. So most of the time the screen is just very fuzzy. It just doesn't work well on the modern TVs. So yeah, this does pretty much run. Whoops! Oh, this really runs full speed. This is actually the first time of me trying this out on this computer. Oh, did you see this ship? It just jumped half a meter to the left. Also one of those glitches. I'm not sure if this actually will happen on the original hardware, but yeah, you see some rendering issues. Now you have to pull that that crossbow, that huge ass crossbow, because you have to fire upon the ship, but you get attacked by all these sentries. Now this really runs full speed, and it really shows how amazing these PlayStation Portable games actually work. I think it's a lost and pull down to fire the ballista, and then just yep, and then it just fires upon the ship. The ship gets destroyed. I think it's. I think what Sony should have done is actually produce a UMD reader for connecting up to the PlayStation 3. In oh, what's that? Oh, the corpse of Eurybrides. Eurybrides. Oh, I just destroyed one of the leaders. But I mean, the fact that this just runs as good as it does, it shows you how good the emulator actually is. Hold. Now there's some flickering effects going on, so there are some graphical issues. You would not have that on the original hardware. And this, of course, is there. It's just filled with timed events. Oh, look at that! Let's see how the God of War game actually runs on the PlayStation 2. PlayStation 2. Oh, and there, of course, there's this Outrun game on the PlayStation 2 as well. Let's see how that works. Outrun 2SP. This is a very expensive version. I believe if this is the Japanese version, and I did rip my Japanese version, but I found out that the Japanese version, yeah, this Japanese version of Outrun goes for crazy sums of money. Really crazy sums of money. Hundreds and hundreds of euros, I believe. I'm not selling mine, but I will not ever buy Outrun for that amount of money. Let me see. Ghost. So this is PlayStation 2, a Japanese game, and let's go for the Dino and go for Outrun mode. Yep, splash wave. Okay, so there may be actually a difference between the the Ridge Racer 1 and 2 game on the PSP emulator. Now this doesn't run full speed. It runs too slow. I think it runs about, this is the software mode, I think it runs about at 80%. There's a lot of stuff going on, 68% even. Let's see if I go to hardware mode, DirectX 11, and let's you maybe actually be able to see how fast it'll run. Now it runs full speed, I think. Yeah, 93%. And it's the NTSC version, so I mean, I'm used to the PAL release, which runs a tad slower. But yeah, I mean, as you can see, in certain games, running the hardware version of the plugin actually helps. And as you can see, this has very little graphical errors, and the dirt that's kicked up of the car. Oh yeah, of course, this is something that, I mean, it does run faster, but there's this fog effect that is just not rendered properly in this game. As you can see, there's just this big line, and if you go to the software mode, so it's far from perfect yet. If you go to the software mode, it instantly vanishes, and it's running at 75%. So yeah, what do you do? Well, I guess for now this game just doesn't work properly on the emulator yet, because it's just too slow. And my system isn't a slouch, but yeah, certain games will run perfect, other games will just be a tad too slow. And I think the fog error, or the fog error with the hello, retro rewind, the fog thing in the hardware rendering mode is just, yeah, it's just something I would not be able to live with. But this is just going too slow. 75%, 82%, yeah, it's not how you want to play this game. But hopefully they will be able to fix either the fog stuff in the hardware mode, or get this up and running a bit faster. But yeah, this game also is capable on the real hardware. You can actually run this at 480p, which basically turns, creates a bit of a sort of HD mode almost on the original PlayStation if you hook it up over composite. But yeah, this, I mean, it doesn't show graphical errors. Let's jump back to the hardware mode. Whoop. Now, what you see with this PlayStation 2 emulator, that graphical errors are much more frequent with the now this actually is very playable like this. Here you have the fog thing again, which, you know, really takes away from the screen. And it's some sort of I think what happens is, and that also happens with the shades in the it also happens with the shade in the on the Ridge Racer type Ridge Racer 5, is that they sort of do this interlaced effect. This fog is being created every other. It's a trick they use. They have this sort of transparent fog, in which they use a transparency effect by rendering the fog every other screen. And the way this emulator works actually is by interpolating both of these screens. I mean, it's an interpolated. Actually, the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2, they have interlaced graphics because of the CRTs that they are running on. So a lot of the effects that they use sometimes take advantage of this interlaced effect, and you will have issues using one of those interlaced effects when using this on a progressive screen like this. Now, of course, you could try to emulate it perfectly, and then you do that in software mode, but that slows down the machine significantly because it has to render. I mean, it does take a huge toll on the rendering engine. I'm not sure if I can explain correctly, but yeah, so this is more or less 100%. It does feel like 100% most of the time. This runs at a solid 60 frames per second. And here you have this interlaced fog effect again. I'll show you because I won't be. I'll show you with the Ridge Racer Type 5, which was a release game. It also has shadows underneath the cars. R-Racing Evolution. Ridge Racer Type 5. Yeah. So I'm using the hardware rendering on the PSP emulation. Are you using DirectX backend because the DirectX 11 is not quite as good as that one yet? Oh, okay. I think I will. I am. I'm not sure, but I guess. Yeah, this is the video not rendering properly on the hardware mode. It does render properly on the software mode, but that's a good tip, Paul. Using DirectX 9 instead of DirectX 11. I might actually have opted to use DirectX 11. Ridge Racer Type 5. Now this actually uses a very weird interlaced graphics mode, and here you can actually see the effect. Flashing shadows underneath the cars. They opted not to have pitch black shades underneath the cars, but some sort of translucent effects. And you can also see that the way the textures are mapped on the cars, they use a very fancy multiple texture layer thing on the cars, which the hardware rendering just doesn't want to work properly with. And you actually saw that the shades underneath the cars, they turn into huge pillars the moment they lifted off in the air. But this is actually not a video. This is actually the screen, the engine rendering the graphics. But this actually runs at full speed. But let's change it into software mode, because you would hope that this error disappears when you go into software rendering. But sadly, it will not. Let me see, DirectX 11 software. It's a bit slower. And also this, I mean, if you really want to enjoy this game, you really need to play this on a PlayStation 2 original. Because, yeah, it's just, the emulator just doesn't load. Nope. New entry, continue. New entry. Yeah, now tuning, come on. Normal. Yeah, team name. Normal. Solvolute. But the cool thing is with FreeMcBooth, you can actually play this off a USB stick on the original PlayStation 2, which is actually quite amazing. Yeah, not only FreeMcBooth, but also what is it? Open HD Load or something. So this pretty much runs full speed. Software mode, And let's see how the shades underneath the cars actually will function. This software mode does do away with the texture errors, and I think it's very tough to I mean this emotion engine. It's a very tough to emulate system with all sorts of graphic priorities. There's depth of field going on, which is actually quite nice. And this actually runs full speed, but you see the textures on the cars are good, but you do get this cursor-like shade underneath the cars. And I'm not sure if cars are airlifted, if they have the same pillar effects, but this is a stellar. I mean, if you are, this is like Ridge Racer Type 4 on steroids. And I mean, it really introduces a level of drifting much similar to what you find on in the Ridge Racer 6 and 7 series. But this does run full speed, but it's a shame that the shades, yeah, they use a sort of interlaced effect where the engine really has to put together an image that is actually intended to be interlaced originally, turn it into a progressive screen. And yeah, as you can see, that creates unwanted effects. But I guess in this game the software mode is actually preferred over the hardware mode because yeah, it does work with the textures better. And it was a stellar looking game back in the day, but I mean, playing this on an emulator like this doesn't do it justice as much. So that's the reason why I still have my, oh yeah, the shade pillar thing is still a thing. Now, I mean, it does work well in the original hardware because what happens is that you get some sort of translucent shade thing that's being casted from underneath the cars, and it works really well on hardware. It's not a real shade, of course, but so even on a fast system, you know, PlayStation 2 emulation is not perfect yet. A lot of games do work. I think over 90% of the games are actually playable, but there's graphical errors to some extent in some of the games. Let's check out another game. Oh yeah, Shadow of the Colossus. Let me see. One of his Shadow of the Colossus. That's an amazing game. I'm not sure if this will actually run on it. I've never tried it yet on the emulator. Now these games, they're actually running off a NAS, which also may cause some slowdown in access times. But they are on the NAS because I'm using the same images on the real machines, using FreeMcBoot and Open PS2 Loader to load in the images from the NAS inside of the systems, and I'm actually able to play those images off the network. This saves wear and tear on the optical drives of the PlayStations, and I have a perfectly fine working PlayStation 2 that has a jammed disk drive, but I stick in the open what is the FreeMcBoot and the Open PS2 Loader, and I'm able to still use that unit without the disk actually working. So pretty cool. So Shadow of the Colossus, new game. I guess this a game like this works best in software mode because of a lot of the fancy stuff that's going on. Let me see if it actually will run full speed. It's running at 68, so yeah, perhaps I should I should put it into hardware mode. And now it's still hovering at 70%, 60%. So yeah, this game was actually stellar looking on the original PlayStation 2. And certain scenes are just too slow, I guess, but wow. A lot of the lighting effects do work properly. So, yeah, this is a very sad game with a very sad ending. And look at that. This is actually some water with reflections going on. It's just an awesome looking game, and it hovers between 80, 60 and 100%. But a lot of the effects work properly. Now you can upscale this, you can upscale these graphics to 1080p, and you'll basically get the same thing as the HD remake on the PlayStation 3, but that doesn't do the textures justice. I mean, these textures used in the game actually work best with this native resolution, and I think the PlayStation 3 HD remake looks horrible. It doesn't do the textures justice, and if you want to play this game, go for the PlayStation 4 remake, because that was built from the ground up, and it actually looks stellar on the PlayStation 4, and it uses enhanced textures and stuff. Mr. Retro Rewind, what's your thoughts on the rumored Nintendo Switch emulation by the same team that made Cemu, the Wii U emulator? Oh my god. Yeah, I don't think it's, how do you say it? You know, emulation isn't illegal, but emulating games that are still current, I don't approve of necessarily. I don't think it's a good idea to just emulate the Switch. It's a system that Nintendo has put a lot of money in, has put a lot of money into developing it. Yeah, it'll just focus negatively on the community, the emulation community, and I guess it potentially will cause a lot of issues and a lot of problems. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of emulating current gen systems. Of course, I tried out Cemu and Zelda Breath of the Wild. I bought that game twice. Elisa is playing it downstairs on the Wii U. I actually bought a second-hand Wii U with the game installed on it. So I figured, you know, having bought it twice, it wasn't that bad. Putting it on my PC, and it does run beautifully on the PC, but will I play it on the PC? No. It's just a proof of concept. But of course the Wii U is a dead system, so emulating the Wii U I don't have many problems with, I guess. But let's see, emulation for me, let's move out of this. Emulation for me, especially the older systems, has allowed me to sample games that I would not otherwise have sampled. And let me see. Le Mans 24 hours. Will that work? I just didn't click it, right? Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, it probably will make Nintendo hunt down the people that make the Cemu emulator, and probably will be very negative. So yeah, you know, there's just no need to do that yet, I guess. It's not by the Cemu team, it's the Citra 3DS team. Oh, yeah, again, Citra 3DS. I have not tried that emulator yet, because it's still a current gen system. It's commercially still a functioning system. Yeah, it's very interesting that they do try it, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of emulating systems that are too new. There's just no need for it yet. Of course, if you start early, when the system is still in its prime, for archival purposes and being able to play it and being able to compare it with the real hardware, it's actually perhaps not that bad. Quick race, yeah, why not? Go race. Yeah, I mean, it could. I mean, being able to play 3DS games on the large screen without the 3D effects has got its advantages. I mean, I've been using the 2DS emulator because, yeah, a larger screen is nicer. I mean, my eyes are getting older, and staring at a small screen is not always something that I enjoy. Now this runs full speed. Let me see. I think this. I mean, this is the aspect ratio is not properly yet. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're in agreement here. I mean, and there's people who probably will think it's okay, but I think, you know, emulation for ease of use, being able to preserve the gameplay, I think it's nice. But if you do it with the current gen systems, not so much. I'm not sure if this game actually will allow to change the aspect ratio. I don't think so. No, it doesn't. It doesn't allow you to. Well, this runs full speed. This is actually quite nice. Lara Croft Tomb Raider Collection, for example. Let's see. And I usually forget in what mode I am. If you press Alt Enter, you usually are able to tell this is hardware mode. So I mean, it all depends what you want. You know, you could say, you know, I will default to hardware mode, and if there's graphical issues, I will go to software mode. It depends on the speed of your system. My system is capable of running most titles in software mode, so you don't have to switch around that much if you just run the games that you want to run. But for a lot of people, that may not be possible, and they have to switch around. Not sure what this was, but some sort of video. Let me see. The one surprise for me was that nobody never ever emulated the Xbox, seeing as it's basically a PC. Yeah, well, nobody ever. Actually, there are emulators for the Xbox. Even when it was still in its prime, there was an emulator that basically ran a game, Halo or something. But yeah, I mean, it being as similar to a PC as can be, you would think that, you know, an original Xbox emulator, you know, will be possible. But it's astounding that they haven't. I would love to be able to play a lot of my original Xbox games on the PC. I mean, you could archive using an original Xbox a lot of the discs to hard drive and just, you know, play it with the emulator like that. I really hope something like that will exist at some point. Of course, Xbox, Microsoft has always made a big point of supporting original Xbox on the Xbox 360. There's a lovely video out of explaining how this was achieved on the original Xbox, being able to execute x86 code on a 6-core or 3-core power PC unit that the Xbox 360 is. Yeah, so if it is possible to achieve hardware emulation on an Xbox 360 of the original Xbox, why isn't it possible on a PC? It's astounding that it just still not. Yeah, I do think start game. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. It's astounding how good the games of this generation actually still look. And I think, I mean, you could upscale it to, you know, 1080p. You could enhance the resolution, the rendered resolution, but I tend to want to use the games at the intended resolutions, because yeah, that's just, unless it's like, you know, super fancy, and but most often it just doesn't work well. You know, I prefer smoothness over resolution, and certain people just prefer resolution over everything else. I'd much rather have a high frame rate and a lower resolution than high resolution and a stupid frame rate. But yeah, it's crazy that that they didn't come up with a hardware PC, with a PC emulating the original Xbox. Perhaps people are afraid of Microsoft bearing down on them. I mean, that really could be an issue, of course. Skip cinematic. Yeah. So this also is in the snow, and you see whiffs of air, hot air coming out of her mouth. But this is just very playable. And just, I'm not sure which way, this way I believe. But yeah, games like this still are very, very playable. Oops. Is it possible for me to jump around yet? No. Yeah. And move to the other one. And then just jump around. Whoops. So, you know, it's like a climbing tutorial. Yeah, come on, you can do it. So, oh yeah, and then this is a good way to just learn you how to do it. Yeah, so it's not a definite replacement. We could go into Sega CD, for example. Yeah. What Sega did, I mean, they were fine with the Mega Drive and the Master System, and then everything after that is just one big mess, where they actually pulled something that is very similar to what what Commodore did. Actually, they introduced a ton of different variations. Well, with Sega, with the 32X and the Sega CD, I mean, they were software compatible, downwards compatible, but they actually were competing with each other. The Saturn, of course, came out when the 32X and the Sega CD, and then the Dreamcast and the Saturn. You know, it's just crazy. And Sony just kept rocking the same machine same machines forever. And Nintendo usually has a handheld and then a home console, usually, you know, with the 3DS and the Wii U. But with the Switch, that all changed. Yeah, I think an older generation will probably want to use consoles hooked up to the TV. You know, I'm not that of a mobile gamer, I guess. Let me see. Spot on what you say. The graphics have not leapt forward as much. It's all about pixel detail now in surround. Yeah, it's you know, distance of rendering and pixel detail, fancy effects. But I guess the leap in graphics isn't that big. Now let's try the Saturn. Emulation of that really isn't that good, actually. It's a very complicated system, and of course I say the Sony systems, but let's check out some Saturn games. I do have a Saturn. I have an extensive PAL library. Also, I have quite a few Japanese shmups on it. And of course, emulating the Saturn, I did image quite a few of my discs, and Chuck Rock 1, yeah, that's a cool game. I did rip quite a few of my Saturn discs, and you get to know the idiosyncrasies of discs, actually, because the Saturn discs, they usually consist of a data partition. And oh yeah, this happens to be underwater, with error sectors at the end of the data partition, and then audio partitions. If you are ripping Saturn discs, you really have to make sure that these sectors are read in as damaged sectors, as errored sectors. Sony did something similar with some discs not having any errors whatsoever, and certain discs being just ridden with errors. But if and they count on the disk drive on the game to read these sectors, and if the disk drive comes up with an error, then the game says okay and continues. But if the errors weren't encountered, if you ripped the games wrong, it could hang the system, but it could also produce very weird, unwanted results within the games. And yeah, so a lot of copy protection was actually used back in the day by introducing errors on the disks. Not real errors, but just file system errors. Whoa, bullet hell, bullet hell, bullet hell. But yeah, I mean, the Saturn is actually quite a good pixel pusher. And the PlayStation actually as well. Let me see. Chuck Rock. Let me see. Chuck Rock. I'm not sure if that actually was on the... no, I think that was on the Sega CD, right? Yeah, that was on the Sega CD. Donpachi. Sega Dreamcast is my favorite console of all time, way ahead of its time. Yeah, I happen to agree that it was way ahead of its time. When I got wind of the Dreamcast, I really had to have one, and I actually have. I found it such an amazing system that I actually ended up getting 3 or 4 as spares, which are still in my attic. Sadly to say is that my Dreamcast collection, I'm talking about Dreamcast, sorry, I might have said Saturn, but my Dreamcast collection is actually very small. It's only 2 vertical Billy spots, like 2, 8, perhaps 20 or so titles. because it was so bloody easy to. I just got ADSL back then, and all these CDI images and disc juggler, and oh, it was just too easy to burn those discs and play them on your Dreamcast, which was a crying shame. But it also made, well, I mean, buying Dreamcast games in video game stores was just not very possible. It was before the internet really kicked off. It really was it really had a hard, you really had a hard time buying Dreamcast games. But of course, I do have some gems, like this, of course, the Millennium Soldier game that I just showed you. This one, Kiss Psycho Circus, is one of them. Hydro Thunder really is a great title as well. Sega Rally, one of the few DirectX Windows CE games. But yeah, I mean, the Dreamcast, I mean, it basically was a DirectX compatible game, and it was very easy to develop for. A lot of emulators came out for it. And emulation of the Dreamcast actually is quite doable. Not too shabby, but it doesn't completely replace the Dreamcast. And I wonder, what do you think of the solid-state storage solutions that actually are on offer for the Dreamcast? You have options that plug in the back on a sort of network adapter port, I believe. You also have units that completely replace the optical drive. What do you think of those solutions for the Dreamcast? Using optical, using how do you say that? Using a solid-state media instead of optical media. I thought I was playing it, but I think I was just talking too much. Insertion. Leader to base, ringleader to base. Oh, I just love these cave shooters. And I guess the hey Ian. Yeah, Dreamcast stuff really is very hard to get hold of, and that basically is the result of me not having too much. Now, I could, of course, try to buy a lot of Dreamcast stuff, but I also found the Dreamcast not to be that reliable. I've had the power supply that hooks up to the motherboard with 4 pins, I believe, and that connection sort of gets corrupted sometimes, and you have all sorts of boot errors, but you can easily replace those or change them. Yeah, Hydro Thunder, Sega Rally, great titles. And the Saturn really was a good system for shmups and stuff. Well, we could go Dreamcast for a bit. This 18-wheeler, this is also quite a cool game. Yeah, this strays a bit from the Sony. Can you replace your Sony? But let's extend it into a Sega. I really find it quite amazing that they were able to emulate the Dreamcast only to a certain point, because all these emulators out there, they only emulate the games that use their own OS, because if you want to boot a game that uses Windows CE, like Sega Rally for example, it will not work, because Windows CE is not emulated within the emulator, probably because the code's not there. But I do think this does not work. we'll go for the other one then. Some of these titles are CDI titles, which are ripped versions, but you also have complete versions that were transferred using the special software and the network, the Ethernet adapter. Yeah, Dreamcast, hey, backward forward punch, a long time ago. I feel like Dreamcast emulation has always been not quite right for me. Doesn't feel 100%. Yeah, well, yeah, for sure, because look, I tried to run this game, 18-wheeler, and it just doesn't want to work. Both versions. Now I could change around the emulator and change it to let me see, Demul, or what is it? Let me see, Demul. But I'm not sure if that'll work. Oh, and it yeah, you won't be able to see because it my screen grabbing software just doesn't it does work on the but you only see this window. Let me see if I can Alt and enter it. You might be able to see. Yeah. Start. So yeah, resolution changes. It doesn't really like it. But yeah, RetroArch doesn't. Yeah, the game doesn't want to be played. RetroArch doesn't like it, but Demul or whatever does like it. So yeah, if you encounter a game that doesn't play, it usually pays to check out if another game, if another emulator. Oh, look at that! I just love that Afro hairdo. And when I played this first, the physics of the little Sonic dude hanging off the mirror was just awesome. You really have a sense of having a heavy, driving a heavy car, you know, a heavy truck. There's this momentum, and there's this thing that just, yeah. The physics are actually, well, it's an arcade game, but it really gives you a sense of driving a... oh, and then you get this. It really doesn't want to be played. Oh, there was a bit of a pause. I guess we need to use the triggers. Now I am using a Logitech Gamepad Rumblepad 2, which doesn't actually have analog triggers. It just has trigger buttons, and then just shift it into high. But yeah, this just doesn't feel right. You know, it's just not full speed. So, I mean, Sega Dreamcast, you don't want to go emulation. Let me see. I tried RetroArch a few times. Maybe I haven't spent enough time, but the interface drives me crazy. Yeah. Well, let me see. RetroArch did improve, because this is also an interface. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this one, but yeah, it's the previous interface was even more convoluted, but this actually is not so bad. Not so bad. You can actually, if you play the games from within the games that you play from within the Launchbox emulator, actually it keeps track of, so you can actually go back. For example, Gyrus run. Let me see, and then it's F4, I believe, to start. So you easily go back to previously played games, but yeah, the interface is used to be very convoluted. That's why I'm using Launchbox as a front end. But yeah, I mean, I do have several Atari 8-bit systems. One is in the drawer on my entertainment system. Another one is set up with a solid state storage solution over at my CRT spot. But pulling them out just to play a game of Gyrus, I just don't do that, you know. I do take them out, and then I just spend an afternoon playing Atari 8-bit, for example. But yeah, that's. Let me see. You press. Yeah, it can be quite convoluted. Now, this is, for example, a game could not be loaded from the playlist. Oh, probably because it's been it's been moved. Load content. Let's see. Dreamcast, emulation. Whoops. Launchbox, Sony PlayStation, Launchbox, games. Nope. You actually see the structure of my of my hard drive. Sony PlayStation. So I guess it's in the original Launchbox directory. Games, Sega Dreamcast, and then Buggy Heat. Aricast. So it's a bit convoluted, I guess. You could actually scrape. The files, and you can have them appear in categories, just like the PlayStation cross media bar, to have easy access to them. But for some reason, that just doesn't work right, you know. So. I think it's I mean, it's ease of use, of course, but it just doesn't replace the system completely. Yeah, buying a complete hyperspin hard drive. Yeah, most of the times yeah, I've seen people buying them. It's a similar setup with a similar setup to Retro Launch or Launchbox. Actually, now here you can actually see some other graphical aberrations with the shades of the car not being properly mapped. But I mean, it does run very nicely. But it looks nicer on the real system. Well, but RetroArch really is taking huge strides. I mean, it used to be unusable for me, and now with this PlayStation cross media bar thing, it really becomes more playable. A lot of the Raspberry Pi emulation, RetroPie distributions actually use quite a fair bit of RetroArch underneath, carefully hidden away. It's actually possible to run that PlayStation media bar on the RetroPie as well, on the Raspberry Pi as well. And I was actually quite partial to this buggy racing game. It's actually fairly easy. It's not the best game, but I just liked it. So I have this original as well, but and this actually on the original Dreamcast, it also ran at 640 by 480, and yeah, I just love that machine. But yeah, sadly, I don't have the library that I would like to have on it. But yeah, a complete hyperspin hard drive. I think a lot of these guys that earn money putting together or imaging their Hyperspin drives are just assholes. But it's such a hassle setting it all up that, yeah, I mean, if you are daunted by the whole hyperspin thing, then yeah, buy a completely configured hard drive can work wonders. You do get an awful lot of games at the same time. But there is a bit of controversy, you know, I mean, it's not legal, and the guys behind the Hyperspin drives, they actually behave very, how do you say that? They're on a bit of a warpath with the Launchbox community, because they have been threatening the Launchbox community actually in some way. So yeah, it's not, you know, I just... If you want to buy a complete Hyperspin hard drive, by all means, but do scan the files. And I have seen people buying the drive with the drive not being imaged properly, where they had to do where they had to restore the partition because the partition was hidden, and you know, all sorts of stuff that was going on. And they default to a certain those Hyperspin drives also default to a certain Windows drive letter. Often it's H, I believe. And you really, if you hook it up to your system, it has to be at that specific drive letter. Otherwise, it will just not function. So there's all sorts of yeah. I mean, yeah, the fact that it just does look like Buggy Boy, I guess that's the reason why I like it so much. Speaking about Buggy Boy. And this actually, it's fairly easy to set up this Launchbox. What I could show you is actually the big box variant. Launchbox is free to use, but if you want to use the big box variant, you will have to pay for a license. You could buy a license for a certain amount of time, but you can also buy a license that is actually a lifetime license. You can use it on multiple PCs. Let me see if the no, my joystick just doesn't want to work with it yet. But this actually looks very similar to the Hyperspin drive. Let me see, 1943. Yeah, not everything has screenshots, but yeah, you know, for a system that boots into the Chaos Engine, that's also one of my favorite titles. Play. Loading game, hopefully. Yeah, this an Amiga CD32 with Chaos Engine. I mean, talk about must-have titles for a console. If you have a Amiga CD32, this Bitmap Brother game is also mandatory. Mandatory. Yeah, it takes a bit of time loading. I believe this CD32 actually came with a single-speed CD-ROM drive. Let me see. Yeah, I mean this version actually has a very extensive opening cinematic that is not found on the Mega Drive or SNES versions. And I just think this Bitmap Brothers, you know, pixel games, 2D pixel games are just, you know, awesome. I'll dodge some bullets. It's all in the diagonals in this game, and I always found it easier to play with on the Mega Drive. I always found it easier to play with a Japanese controller, which has a much more sensitive D-pad than the NTSC European controller. But this, if you play this with the CD32 gamepad, I wasn't a big fan of that. But it had 4 buttons, so I believe, yeah, 4. So it was much. That actually was something that made me like a lot of these console games more than the old 8-bit, 16-bit home computers, because most often they had this single fire button mechanic, which of course with the NES you had 2 buttons, so jump and fire could be mapped independently of each other. So yeah, that's not too bad. Yeah, this actually, oh, I could show it on the NES. Let me see, F12. I think this was. Let's get out of here. I think this is a bit more convoluted to use, so I tend to use the desktop version. I like that much better. To set it, did you have to rename the ROM files to specific names, and did it download the screens automatically for the covers? Well, it does do quite an interesting. It does scrape from various sources, and it uses its own database, but it also uses other databases. And it basically downloads a ton of the images, as long as the first bit of the name actually is something that is recognized, and it doesn't have to be precise. It actually recognizes a lot of these games, and you just drop them in, and you can opt to have this software copy all the game files into its own structure, or you can leave them at a specific directory or folder, and then it gives you, after dragging them to this file, after the import screens are shown, or if when the import screens are shown, you can actually change the names, alter the names and stuff, and it's actually very easy. There's a ton of actually this Launchbox. The programmer and his team, they actually have a YouTube channel, and there's a ton of tutorials online on how to put games into this system, and how to set up the emulators. Setting up the emulators is not that hard. It looks a bit daunting. Certain emulators use specific command line stuff, you know, full screen. A lot of these WinVice emulators actually, if you wanna use the VIC-20 cart, for example, I have an option to put it into NTSC, confirm exit, full screen, and cart A. That's something that that you can find in a lot of the forums, and once you've and that's the cool thing. Once you've configured your Launchbox, and I have on this system, I have it on drive D. It's actually portable. You can just drag it over to a different folder, a different drive, and it'll just work. Because all the links used within the Launchbox system are actually relative to its directory. Now, certain emulators, I've put all the emulators that I use, I've put in this folder. This is all the emulators that I use for all these games. Certain emulators default to a certain hardware default. Yeah, how do you say that? They hardware map to a certain drive and stuff. So sometimes you just have to reconfigure the emulator to be run from a specific directory and stuff. But it's actually fairly easy to have these emulators point to the correct drive and stuff. But Launchbox actually takes care of firing up the emulator, from within the Launchbox directory, and sometimes you just have to make sure that the emulator itself has the plugins from a certain directory and whatever. Often these emulators actually work relative to their own directory, so yeah, often it's very portable. And it uses databases which you can easily edit. The emulators are in XML files. Platforms are in XML files. These are basically XML text files. The platforms here are the games stored, relative, but also hardware coded. Sometimes you can easily edit those with save and replace. So if you want to move a specific platform to a different drive, you can outside of the emulator. I found it very easy to use. Very easy to. It's very straightforward. Much more straightforward than Hyperspin, for example. With Hyperspin, of course, was produced in an era where a lot of these emulators were single platform emulators, and not all of them had the same button layout and stuff. So a system like Hyperspin actually defaulted to keyboard inputs, for example, defaulting similar keyboard inputs and mapping them to a controller. So you have this translation thing going on with key to joypad software running in the background. Actually quite a thing, which actually does introduce quite a bit of input lag, and that's not the case with Launchbox. So I think Launchbox actually is the preferred system. But you don't have to rename your ROM files. Most of them are just recognized. And yeah, I mean, on this system, I've actually put together all the games all the systems that I want to emulate. And there's 4 2TB hard drives in this rig. So pretty much all the emulating I ever want to do is on this system. So yeah, cool. And it does, you can emulate, you can download movies, you can download manuals, you can download a lot of stuff. And the cool thing is that if you pay for it, you get the big box, which can also be controlled with the joystick. But I'm using a Logitech Rumblepad on this. If you hook up an Xbox One or Xbox 360 controller, it more or less maps to it instantly without any configuration, and it works just like a charm. You know, it just works very well. Okay, yeah, cancel that. Okay, now, yeah, okay, and then yeah. Okay, yeah, my Japanese isn't the greatest. Yeah, you should. I mean, yeah, and if you have some any questions, you know where to reach me. But there's a ton of great tutorials online to just give it a shot. And what always was a big thing for me, not wanting to delve into emulation, is the fact that it's just so hard to get everything up and running, and yeah, it's not fun. And oh, there are some issues going on. There's this car on front, and there's priority issues over here. But you're welcome. Yeah, hope you delve into some of the emulation thing going on, and you can try the software for free. You won't have the big box, but it's not expensive. And once you get if you know what emulator you want to use, it's often a matter of trying to find where. Trying to find out the how do you say that? Why isn't this? It's just not wanna. Oh, triggers. Triggers instead of buttons. Yeah. But if you know your emulators, it's just a matter of finding out whether or not it supports command line options, and you basically fill them in a very similar fashion for all the emulators. Of course, if you want to use as little different emulators as possible. RetroArch just emulates a ton of systems, and it just does map a lot of the controllers in a very similar way. So going RetroArch is actually fairly easy. You only have to configure the emulator once, and you just say, well, I want to use this and this and this and this systems with it, defining the specific course that RetroArch needs to try. It's all very straightforward, actually. And yeah, I think I've been going on for like, bloody hell, 2 hours. Yeah. Let me see a different mouse. A transition. And put up the chat again. So, I have no idea if people are still watching. The live chat is on. Let's see if I can see if there's people watching. 12 watching. Oh wow. Amazing. Yeah, I just think I will call it quits. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if anyone has some questions for me. I can answer. Now's the time. So your plan is to test emulation in general, try something that makes it actually better emulated, like Star Fox on SNES with the speed increase to help frame rate. Yeah, I mean, that's true. With the emulators, you can actually overclock the SuperFX chip on the SNES, for example, to allow it to run Star Fox much nicer than it would on the original system. Also, that little racing game, that's actually quite cool. You could. There's people that have been overclocking the cartridges by putting different crystals in there, yeah, doing it in software is actually a lot safer, I think. Yeah, I for now I wanted to create the same experience, you know, the pixel for pixel perfect experience, but you could opt to render at much higher resolutions, use different textures. Super Nintendo, for example, the effects speed up, but also Nintendo 64. You know, rendering stuff at a much higher resolution is actually pretty much default with a lot of these emulators. Let me see. 1080 snowboarding, for example. If you use RetroArch, it'll do the hopefully it'll run. Yeah. It's not always behaving like it should, my system, but let me see. Let's move it around. Transition. And let's go. Move back the chat. Now, an emulator like RetroArch defaults it to the same resolution. But a lot of these Nintendo 64 emulators will actually render a lot of the things at a higher resolution. So you will have the rather pixelated text and 2D images on the screen, and a super high res. Oh bloody hell! Yeah, that's what I usually do when I try to. Let me see. I always forget. What? oh yeah, this you wanna squeeze. What is it? I just love this game, but it looks better with this pixelated look than if you run it in an emulator that just enhances the graphics tremendously. Now it all looks like the same system, but I could show you how it looks in a different emulator. Let's see if I can run that on D. There's this emulator, Mupin. I'm not sure if I have mapped my controllers already. Input settings. Load ROM. Let's see if I'm able to Nintendo 64. 1080 snowboarding. Choose graphics plugin. No, I haven't defined this. So Project 64 I have been using. I think. Let's see, Project Snowboarding. Oh, attempt to open failed. Why not? Change directory. This is one of example. This is the one of the examples of a game of an emulator. Having to change the emulator a bit. Games, Nintendo 64. Before it'll work, like so. And then 1080 snowboarding. Let's see. Configure controller plugin. I think this emulator actually this emulator renders the polygons at a much higher resolution than the and I haven't mapped the controllers yet. So the polygons, they look very high. That's a very high resolution, and the start and all the 2D images, they just look out of place. And what you also see is when using a high resolution for the polygons, you actually look at that. Logitech Rumblepad. Let me see, and then it's like up, down, left, right, analog stick, up, down, left, right. I mean, this is probably something that just creeps people out. It's I always use that for the second analog stick, left, right, and then B, and then A, Z trigger is button 7, and start is that, and save, and then it's like the Logitech Rumblepad 2. Okay. Yeah. Let me see. Is the MES emulator still a thing? Yes, it is, but it was combined with Mame. There are still separate compiles possible. I'm using the latest version. The latest version of MES that I'm using is 1.151. But yeah, so this is the same game running in a higher resolution. And as you can see, you will see a lot of things like surrounding the fireplace. You see that the fire actually consists of two separate bits. You know, you see the textures not aligning up properly, the polygons. You see, and you actually notice the polygons more. It's a very low polygon count, and using a lower resolution, you actually see that the well, it's, yeah. You can actually count the polygons. So this, I think, looks a lot less. I mean, a lot of people actually prefer this because it's like, you know, it's like much more smooth when it comes to the polygons. But yeah, you see a very pixelated background with the lake just looking like a pixelated mess. You know, not really. It really looks like a pixelated mess down there, not really fitting with the rest of the graphics. So I tend not to like that, actually. So if we move back to the RetroArch version, yeah, the system really has some issues moving back and forth between. Yeah, you could use different textures. You know, people have enhanced the textures, but I think the RetroArch system is not responding. Ever since this new Spectre update, my system has become less responsive. Which is a shame. I'm not sure why. Sometimes it's just a matter of rebooting it, so let's reboot it again. I just quickly wanted to show you the difference, but yeah, good evening, Mr. Retro Rewind. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again sometime. I'm rebooting my system for the rest of you watching to show you that the integrated look of the pixelated game with a lower resolution actually looks nicer. And that's, let me see. Now often when stuff like this, oh yeah, now it just my system just refused to boot for a bit. Yeah, the login screen. Oh, different. Yeah. Come. Okay, let's Launchbox. Yeah, now this is a spare system. I'm not sure if this actually is software or hardware related. Some of these crashes. It's really is a spare system. I might actually move this setup to a different, perhaps more reliable system because yeah, I'm not sure. But yeah, let's see if RetroArch will bump into place, bump into being. Yeah, now it will. Now this is just as the last game, you know, the 1080, but just with using the same resolution as the original. And now the menu just looks in place. Match race, and if I go downhill, you still see that bits of the environment are actually just flat photos on a mesh of polygons, but it's less. Yeah, I will try a. I will in just a bit. As you can see, the the lake in the background actually looks more, I mean, it still looks pixelated, but it just doesn't look that much out of place. It's just more of a cohesive thing. So using a higher resolution doesn't always work. And now actually the little player looks a lot nicer as well, and you can actually have the effect of the wind on its clothes, on his clothes, actually looks a lot nicer. So, and also the effects of the snow being sprayed from underneath the board, and actually it's a lot more playable. I actually enjoy playing this quite a bit more, and it's a higher frame rate, it's a more solid frame rate, so yeah, that's actually working a lot better. Let me see, more cohesive, yeah, the other way. What do we work with? Yeah, so I haven't tried HD texture packs. I should give it a go. Let me see. Can you try a 2D PSX game? I want to see if it has the same trouble I've seen before. Well, I'm using a different plugin for the PlayStation 2 emulators these days, and it does. And why? Because it uses 2D a lot better than previous versions. Let's check. Let's select PlayStation. A 2D game. What's a nice 2D game? One of the shooters, I guess. Any suggestions for a 2D game? Ian, have a great trip to Blackpool, Mark. I hope you pick up some goodies. Yeah, I will. Shame that you can't come, but yeah, it's a bit out of your way, I guess, and we'll meet up again and catch up. I think Dodonpachi or Donpachi probably is a good. Let me see. Let's hope that running it doesn't crap up my system, because these emulators, they're not always the best at releasing the resources. Donpachi, come on. And of course I can type it in and more easily come up with a name in the search bar, but yeah, okay, I will. Donpachi, I'll just keep scrolling forever. Oh, Donpachi then. Oh well, bloody hell. Metal Slug, yeah, sure. That's a good one. I should have it. Metal Slug. Yeah, Metal Slug X. Super Vehicle X. Yeah, it's a graphics driver issue, but I guess it's a plugin issue. I'm using a beta of this plugin, but it could also be a graphical driver issue. I've not updated my graphics drivers yet, but yeah, it does have to do with the graphics, with the drivers. Now, it could be that this is actually running too fast. Arcade mission, yes. Yeah, this is running too fast. So I have to reconfigure the emulator to just output at 60 frames max, and that's yeah. Look, this is just this is just crazy. So it's actually possible to emulate this at a very high speed, but let me see. Open ePSXe. The video plugin that I'm using is actually the Blame Arma GPU Soft plugin 1.44. I believe the latest version is actually 1.46, so I may actually have to update as well. FPS, auto detection. I think if I set it to 60, that actually may be the best way to go. I'm not sure if it'll work with, but also this analog plugin thing. But yeah, I mean, changing the graphics and stuff already looks it way too though. Maybe it's a good plugin. Well, it's a good plugin. It scales properly, and it just does it. Does it a lot more better. But this still runs too fast. This still runs too fast in this emulator. This is just crazy. I'm not sure why it just runs too fast. But this would be an idea to just say, you know, this just don't run it on ePSXe, but just use RetroArch and just figure out why it is actually running too fast. You can actually let it default to different emulators, different games. And if I run it now, it'll open RetroArch, and it probably will. And RetroArch actually uses PCSXR, and another one is Beetle PSX, and they do pixel for pixel software rendering, and also a lot of the dithering, like the PlayStation does, correctly. So going RetroArch for PlayStation actually will work. Now, what could be the case for it being too fast? It could be that my Metal Slug image that I did actually doesn't have the doesn't have the proper audio tracks. And what happens is that the PlayStation actually defaults to a speed when it's reading the audio from the discs, I found out. But this works properly. This is just the proper speed. So, oh yeah, and there's a ton of fighting games, of course, Mr. Back Forward Punch. Like Street Fighter Alpha, and you know, all the Street Fighter Alphas, and oh, let's get the extras. Oh, I just love this game. Well, you wouldn't be able to tell because I just let myself. Ah, bloody hell! But yeah, this actually does. This is doing a pixel for pixel one, but it does have a trilinear filtering thing going over it, so it's not like, you know, like square. I like a trilinear filtering over it because, you know, it just makes the pixels less harsh. Mega Man Legends, for example, or Mega Man 8. Now it's also again, it's defaulting to the ePSXe emulator, and if you and you see that changing between RetroArch and ePSXe, the system doesn't like it. So Paul might actually be right that it's a graphics card issue, with the graphics card not really liking those changes. So yeah. Oh, and then. Yeah, and now the reboot, of course, reboots the graphics card. Yeah, probably is a graphics card setting and not so much my system crapping out, but it's a graphics card driver issue. So that's good to know. But yeah, we could default it to, let me see, we could default this to RetroArch as well, because that seems to be what my computer system is liking, or perhaps not now, because it tried to access the other driver. Yeah. I guess I need to install a different graphics driver. Or is it now doing? No, it's not. Yeah, it cannot initialize so I guess I should install a new graphics driver. Let me see. Might be though. Still, well, yeah, it's a little fiddly still. You could yeah, you know, RetroPie on the Raspberry Pi is a little less fiddly, but still, it's a little fiddly. You know, it's not a 100% foolproof solution yet. And I guess using the original hardware, if it functions, is actually a lot more foolproof. So yeah, a reason not to completely replace your game room with emulation just yet. But I guess installing new graphics drivers. Let me see. There are new graphics drivers probably. Oh, I'm not even using. Oh, I'm actually using default Windows 10 drivers for sure, which of course always lag behind. So I probably should. Oh, wait, the other mouse to give you a bit more. Yeah, I should probably install the latest Nvidia drivers just to have to get rid of these issues, because it's the default Windows driver that because I had to reinstall Windows afresh on this system. There was a key on this hardware, but I had to install Windows afresh, and it recognized the graphics card, and it just worked with the emulators. But I just didn't think to replace or change over the graphics drivers yet. So yeah, I should head over to the Nvidia website and just grab those drivers and just install them. It probably will get rid of a lot of the issues that I'm having right now. Let me see. I do a lot of this. Kind of take a bit of a setup. I wish I could though. It'd be great to have one machine doing it all. Well, I still am. You know, that's the goal. I just want. It's a big black, almost like a black monolith from 2001. I want to have a setup that can do it all, and the cool thing about it is that Launchbox, it's very easily transported to a different system, especially if you have the same emulators on the same drive and the games on in the same folders. It's just a matter of copy and pasting, and everything will just run, especially if you use the same controller and stuff. Yeah, just to have an image to drives and stuff, you know, just have to have one system that just is capable of doing it all is a cool thing. Yeah. So I just, you know, I'll just go and install some graphics drivers and just do some testing to see if the system is more reliable that way. I want to thank all of you guys and girls for watching, streaming. Yeah, it's a bit new for me, but I've been improving, I guess, my streaming setup using two systems, and a Yeti microphone actually works a lot better than it used to. I can ad hoc actually do a lot of things. Let me show you guys some of the fancy stuff. I can do this, you know, have the chat. I can do full screen, like so. I can have a select game, intermezzo. I can have a pause screen with some fancy music going on. It's like having your own television studio. And if you use OBS Studio in broadcasting mode, in studio mode, you basically have a what is it? Yeah, that's the different one. Let me see, stream menu without webcam. Here you can actually see here you can actually see what I can actually stream the other PC as well. So basically this is the screen from my setup, and there's actually a looping little video in the bottom of the screen, YouTube. And of course I can check. I can do the outro. And go back to the webcam. So yeah, I mean, I can do it all. You know, it's like editing on the fly. I just love that. And as I do a lot of my videos single take, it actually isn't that different from me doing my videos, because I usually just do a single take and just you know, waffle it all together. So yeah, streaming, it's a bit of a thing though. A lot of people are streaming. Not everybody has the time to watch all these streams. People have been streaming on multiple platforms. I might have to look into that as well, you know, simultaneously streaming to YouTube as well as Twitch. Yeah, could be fun to do that. It's easier to reach a larger audience. I'm not sure if you can do it with OBS, or you will have to use different software. I just happen to like OBS quite a bit. If anyone has information about, you know, multiple platform streaming, like double streaming to Twitch, I am very interested. Oh, cool. Jekyll Air VG. It was fun to watch while cleaning up my gaming space. I think you have a nice setup there. Thank you, man. Yeah. You know, I've been going on for almost 3 hours. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I was just testing out stuff and being able to chat. Of course, the chat has some lag. That's the thing. I think there's an option to actually have less latency, but that degrades the image quality a bit, I believe. And yeah, there's a bit of interference going on over here. That's because a lot of the light is actually coming now from my screen, which is going at 60 Hertz, and the main frequency is actually going at 50 Hertz, so you have a bit of interference. Can't be helped. That's one of the big bad things about living in Europe, I guess, the 50 Hertz mains frequency. But anyways, thanks for watching. It was fun, and I'll trigger the outro and I'll shut up. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you guys again. Outro. Still talking. Thanks for watching, guys.